We've entitled today, when we think about our series on gratefulness, we've entitled it for richer, for poorer. Hopefully, you were all given €100 note as you came in. You probably looked at it, and he's clearly going to say it's obviously about for poorer today because this is black and white and not real. But if you've not got one, you might want one just there on the table back. I'm also going to flip through a little bit of the Bible. If you want one, I don't mind you getting up and getting one, or look things up on your phone. I love a baguette. It's just such a brilliant teaching tool. Didn't think I was going to say that, did you? Such a brilliant tool because it perfectly encapsulates some fantastic biblical teaching. And you're saying, why? Well, of course, the thing with the baguette is, particularly if you lived in France, I know there are echoes of it here in Belgium, but there would be nuclear holocaust and the world would end, but the boulangerie would be open just to make sure that you had your baguette. Because, of course, it's great on the day that you get it. It's absolutely fantastic. If you've seen Ratatouille, the film, you know it's all about in the crust and the crack of the crust. If you've not seen that film, why on earth not? But, of course, the next day, it is completely and utterly inedible. You crack your teeth on it, and how it passes through the body, I do not know. And you just think, okay, Donnie, what has this got to do with the Bible? What do you think about? Just think about the lesson the people of God had to learn when they were, after the Exodus, and they crossed the Red Sea, and they're in the desert, and they're wandering about. And there's not much food in the desert. And so the Lord provided for them. He provided manna. They had to learn 3 things with manna. One is, you can't have too much of it. If you hoard it, it's gone mouldy the next day. They could only take so much and consume it. They had to learn not too much. They also had to learn about not enough. Because, of course, that's what they began grumbling about. You know, Lord, have you just taken us into the desert for us to die because there's no food here? They realised the dangers of not enough. And also when not enough was going to take them in terms of their failure to trust God, failure to listen to Him, failure to, in a sense, walk faithfully with Him. So they knew the dangers just of not enough. But of course, God's provision was such that the manna was there day in, day out. Except, of course, for the Sabbath, when the stuff collected the day before the Sabbath actually was still fine on the Sabbath. One of those kind of little miracles that's so easy to overlook. And then the other thing that they had to learn about manna was, I'm not sure whether they had portable fridges or how they kept things in those days. You know, but one of the things that they had to learn was that in their tents, God didn't just put the manna in their cold store, which would be really great, wouldn't it? You know, you kind of wake up and now you've got, you know, your breakfast is already in the cold store. You don't have to worry about it. No, they had to work for it. They had to go out. They had to gather it. They had to bring it in. Three important lessons they had to learn. And we're going to explore those a little bit. And of course that learning is picked up in Proverbs 30. Those last few verses. I'm sure it's a reflection on that time, because I don't think they had French baguettes. Give me neither, verse 8, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord's? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my gods. It's a little insight into gratitude, gratefulness, and attitude of heart. And what Proverbs points out to us is there are 2 dangers to that sense of gratitude. Riches, poverty. We did a series a while back on Proverbs, and we looked in detail about what Proverbs had to say about wealth. I'm not going to go through it now. If you want to go back, you can look at it. But there were some things there that were really, really important to pick out. That wealth is a blessing from God. It's not an Old Testament principle. If you look at James 1:17, you'll see that. That wealth allows you to provide for loved ones. Proverbs is really, really clear about that. It enables you to do things and care for people and to provide hospitality and all those kinds of things. Proverbs also says that wealth enables influence. Really fascinating little proverb about actually how, you know, a rich person has the ear of the king, but the beggar is always left at the gates. Just, you know, interesting insights into actually it's not a commentary on where the world should be, just the way it is. That actually wealth brings influence. It enables you to speak to others, influence others. It opens doors that otherwise might be closed to you. And it's great. And Proverbs is really, really good at saying wealth is great. But the danger is that wealth can lead us to forgetting God and putting our trust in wealth rather than God. If you've got a Bible, you might want to flip to Deuteronomy chapter 8. I'm going to read from verse 10. Let me read it to you. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you've eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know. Beware lest you say in your hearts, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth. And so it continues. What it says is that there is a real danger with having wealth and influence and authority and all these things, that actually it turns our hearts away from God. And of course, it's not just the Old Testament that says this. If you flip forward to 1 Timothy 6:17, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Do you see just in that little snippet some of the dangers that are there? It says actually if wealth becomes who you are and your raison d'etre and all that you want, then the danger is that you become haughty, high-minded, that you think that you are more important than you are. Remember the parable that Jesus taught about the guy who built bigger and bigger barns because he was doing more and more. And what did Jesus say? You know, you foolish man, this night your life will be asked of you. What have you done? Just the danger in which it becomes our dependence, in which we depend on that and that alone. And of course, unlike them, we live in a world with pension funds and trust funds and all these other things, isn't it? It's so easy just to think, actually, I've got everything I need. What do I need God for? It's an attitude of heart. And the Bible goes on to give us some more examples of what happens if we no longer trust God. Let me take you to Revelation chapter 3. These are the letters written to the churches. I'm going to read, This is to the church in Laodicea. The angel speaking to the church in Laodicea says, "I know your works. You are neither hot nor cold. Would that you were either cold or hot. So, because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." And what's the main accusation against the church in Laodicea? "For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, I need nothing," not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. So the Bible doesn't speak out against wealth or against all the good that it can bring, but it just says, if you are wealthy, guard your hearts. Because it's very, very easy for that which is good and given to us to be a blessing from God. It's so easy for that to be something that actually leads us away from Him. That it's where we put our trust. It's all that we think and becomes something which takes on a significance that it shouldn't have. But if wealth is a challenge, so too is poverty. There was a fantastic interview with J.D. Rockefeller in his late 80s, I think, shortly before he died. And he was interviewed and said, "Look, why is it you're in your 80s and you continue to work? You are one of the wealthiest men on the planet." He was asked, "How much is enough?" Do you know his answer? He said, "A little bit more." There's always a little bit more. It's the danger, isn't it, of wealth, that it becomes so attractive that the pursuit of wealth takes us away from God. But also, there is the reality of the absence of wealth or poverty. And again, Proverbs, you can go back to look at what we did, is really, really clear about this. Actually, if you haven't got enough to eat, life is a struggle. It's really, really difficult to make good choices if you're hanging in there and struggling. And don't think that, that kind of can't happen in one of our kind of church where actually so many of us are here and international travellers and all the rest of it. I remember when we were in Fontainebleau, a young single mum came to me once on Sunday morning. She said, "Dominic," she said, "I think I might have done a terrible thing this morning." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I decided to withhold my tithe to the church to buy my son lunch." Not her and her son, just her son. It was humbling just to realise that even in communities like that, communities like ours, there are people who really struggle to put food on the table, to feed family. And it's a struggle. I'm very sure I did assure her that she had done the right thing and actually told her off for not actually feeding herself either. And we did take them out to lunch and took them home and helped feed them and stuff. But, it's real. Because actually, as the proverb says, Lord, if I'm poor, I'm going to be tempted to take what is not mine because I am so desperate. I am so hungry. I just don't know what to do. And of course that we know those who are poor have no influence, they're often deprived of justice, they're often treated badly. It's all there in Proverbs that talks about the reality of it. And the difficulty is that the absence of wealth can drive us to hunger after it and want more, just as much as having it can. Psalm 73 is just a good place to turn, and it's really, really honest about this. Let me read to you verses 13 and 14 of Psalm 73. All in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. But all day long I've been stricken and rebuked every morning. If I said I will speak thus, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. Why is he anguished? Because actually what he said is, as for me, my feet had almost stumbled up steps, had nearly slipped. I was envious of the wealthy when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. The psalmist says, actually, when I looked around and saw what others had, I began to question the justice of God, whether I could trust him. And it's not just older folk, is it? How often is it? And I remember well from my teenage years when you were at school, you were just dying to have the latest trainers that were really, really cool. To have, I won't tell you what was really cool when I was young, because it makes me sound ancient, but actually it's the temptation for all of us, isn't it? To have the latest, to have the newest. Actually, I've got to, the whole advertising thing's there, isn't it? You're still on an iPhone 10? What's wrong with you? Do you not know how much more the iPhone 14 does? What is wrong with you if you're still on a 10? I mean, those of us who are on our 8 are just, dinosaurs. So easy, isn't it? Just to allow, in our poverty, to be envious of what other people have. The cars they drive, the homes they live in, the clothes they can afford, the holidays they can go on. And actually, for it to seem unfair to us when we struggle, when we find things hard, when things don't go our way. And what the Bible says is that if we long for these things, then they will take us away from God. Look at 2 Timothy 4:10. Why is this fellow worker, the one who worked with Paul and was zealous for God and who won people for Christ, was a great evangelist, one of Paul's companions, went with Timothy to help set up a church, to be an elder, and then why did he wander away? 2 Timothy 4:10 says, because he loved the world. Timothy is encouraged to pray for his fellow worker who has just seen the trappings of the world and said, actually, I want some of that. It's a real danger, isn't it? I remember really, really well being, as you know, I do a chaplaincy during the ski season, generally 1 week, and we were in Wengen, and it was one of those kind of late night bloke things. When blokes, they don't actually sit around a coffee table and talk to each other. They kind of have to sit in long lines, they can't see each other's faces when they open up. And it was the kind of the student equivalent of this. We were all sitting in the hostel late at night, all along the corridor. There was about 7 or 8 of them along the corridor, all facing the wall opposite, never seeing, talking whispers because others were asleep. Actually, I don't think anyone was asleep, but anyway, we were just talking quietly. And then one after another said, I'm really struggling. Students at uni, I'm really, really struggling, not because I don't believe in Jesus, not because I don't love him, not because he hasn't been good to me, not because of a crisis of faith, but I see the lifestyle of my fellow students and I'm envious and I want to live like them because following Jesus is hard and I'm not sure I want to walk that way. It's a danger, isn't it? That if we think that God isn't giving us what we need or what we deserve or what we'd like, that somehow God isn't faithful enough. And we walk away. Again, back to Revelation and to one of those churches there. This is the chapter 2, verse 8. This is the church in Smyrna. I know your tribulation and your poverty, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a and that you are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear about what you are to suffer. Behold, the devil will throw some of you in prison, but you may be tested. And for 10 days you'll have tribulations. But be faithful. You are rich. I will give you the crown of life. That sense in which the angel was just reassuring this church that actually it may seem as walking with Jesus is costly and difficult and hard, but actually the wealth, the richness you have from knowing Christ, of the gift of his Spirit, the promise of eternal life, don't measure your life in terms of what you accumulate or don't accumulate, but in terms of what the Lord has given you. So they're the two dangers of the danger of wealth, the danger of not having wealth. I've got two quick antidotes. You say, oh, it always comes down to this. If for you, actually, the danger is wealth and the lure of wealth and having too much, then giving is a really, really good antidote to that. Because it helps actually release the sense in which I don't have to be an accumulator. Giving is really good for us. It's good for the church, it's good for mission, it's good for all kinds of things that we can do to support those in parts of the world who really, really struggle and don't have enough. But actually, how often do you stop and think, giving is good for me? Why? Because it helps that attitude of heart of I need to be accumulating. And if absence of wealth is an issue, what about asking? Oh, that's hard, isn't it? No, we're way too proud to do that. I'd rather struggle on my own and struggle with what I'm doing than actually say, no, church is a place where I can share this. I can share my struggles. I can share my needs. And the community will take care of me. I met Annie in a place that was called Hildenborough Hall. It was a conference centre that used to be used for evangelism and schools ministry. And there was an evangelist who worked there called Tom Rees. If some of you might have read of his daughter, Jennifer Rees-Larkham, she's written quite a lot of books. Tom was a really godly and gracious guy. And when he would pass the plate round in the church, what they did then, he'd say, give what you can, and please, if you're in need, help yourself. Isn't that an incredible thing to hear when you're at the front, from the front? So it's okay to not have enough. Church is here to help you. Share it. So a couple of questions for you, just a pause I'd like you to think for a moment. You've been given €100 notes. If you're really skilled, you could have actually written sermon notes on the back of it, but no, it's just like you to take that out for a moment and look at it. And just ask yourself in your hearts, when I look at this, do I wish it was real, or am I glad it's not? What's challenging for you? Is it the having or the not having? And maybe ask yourself too, if I'm looking at it thinking, I wish it was real, what is it that worries you at the moment? If you're looking at it and thinking, thank goodness it's not. Again, what's worrying you too? You need to take that home. Not because you can spend it, but just as a reminder to think, every time I look at that, is my heart right before the Lord's? Or actually am I longing for things that aren't from Him? Let me finish by jumping into Philippians with you. Philippians chapter 4, if you've got a Bible, helpful. We won't go into the fact that there's a little bit of a squabble happening at the beginning of chapter 4, isn't that sad? Philippians 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. We know that. You know, we started off by saying, if you're happy, clap your hands. I won't sing. He does a better job of that than I do. These words are challenging, aren't they? Because what they're saying is, whatever circumstances you're in, there needs to be joy in your heart. There needs to be contentment. And why? Note, it's not rejoice at your circumstances, not rejoice at the way you're badly treated, not rejoice at the things that you've got wrong. Rejoice in the Lord. Is Jesus something of joy and contentment to you? Paul has talked about all the way through Philippians how he is joy. You know, his joy is in the Lord. Everything is about Jesus. You go back to Philippians 1 verse 20. To live is Christ, to die is gain, because then he's with Jesus for all eternity. In Philippians 2, when he's encouraging the church, he's saying, actually, your mindset needs to be the same as Jesus. That you're wanting the same things as Jesus, because when you want the things that Jesus wanted, you'll see how great life is, because actually there is this sense of fulfillment and goodness and all the rest of it. In Philippians chapter 3, where he talks about running towards the prize, he trains himself like an athlete. He throws everything off so he can run and win the prize. Why? Because Jesus is his reward, to be with him in all eternity. And the latter part of chapter 4 and verse 13, that actually, let me read it to you. I can do all things through Jesus who strengthens me. He's saying actually, Jesus gives us the perspective on life to understand ourselves, to understand our struggles, our joys, our aims. He said, are you content with Jesus? Is this what drives your contentment? And if you are content, then you are gracious. But note that it's not just when things are going well. Do not be anxious about anything in verse 6. And this is, how did the church in Philippi started? You can go back to Acts 16 and look at that story. It started when Paul was in jail. And what were they doing in jail in Philippi? At whatever time it was in the middle of the night? Well, they were just having a praise party. That's what it says in verse 25. Hang on a second. You're in jail. You're in prison there. You've been accused of all kinds of things. Having a praise party. Because the Lord is at hand. Verse 4. We don't have to be, in a sense, happy and things going well, and our careers going well, and our studies going well, and our future all mapped out, to be joyful in the Lord. What's your perspective? Are you grateful when things are good? Or are you learning to be grateful when things are challenging? When things are uncertain? When things actually are not the way you wished? It's in the Lord, isn't it? That seeing him and seeing what he's done for us and what he enables us to do, and actually the way he has called us to himself, he gives us the perspective that we can rejoice in the Lord. Boy, it's that hard at times. I can still feel emotions strongly. When I used to go home and visit Mum and say, "Hi Mum," and I was just going through the kitchen door, because that's what we always used to do. And you walk in through the kitchen door, and then I'd walk through and into the lounge where Dad was always reading the newspaper, listening to music. For ages after my dad died, I'd still do that walk, and I'd get into the lounge, and suddenly he wasn't there. And the pain of that sudden jolting realization is real. And it's hard. And many of us carry difficulties and hurts. Do we allow those hurts and struggles and difficulties to overcome our joy in the Lord? Or can we be grateful because of who Jesus is? And then you see the second thing in here. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. What Paul says is the key to contentment here is in whatever circumstances you are, turn your worry into prayer. Make your worry list your prayer list. It's a funny thing, worry, isn't it? I don't know whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. I remember a long time ago, it was towards the end of my curacy. We'd been there 4.5 years. Everybody knew we were leaving because you got a fixed term contract, and it was, they knew we were looking for opportunities and things like that. One of the things I used to do there was every week I was in one of our local schools. I used to do a chapel service for them, but I also was there rugby. I used to teach rugby, and I remember being there. It was great fun. Running around, and I could just about keep up with the 11-year-olds, but and then one day, as I was just finishing one of the rugby lessons, one of the teachers said, "Hi, Donna, can you come in tomorrow?" I said, "Oh, I can't do tomorrow. I'm off on something." And they said, "Oh, the headmaster wants to see you," and I said, "No, I can't do tomorrow. Is he free later in the week?" They said, "No, he's on the conference as well." And so we made an appointment for Tuesday the following week. I spent that whole week absolutely worried, thinking, okay, has there been a safeguarding issue? Has there been a rugby tournament that I've missed that we've got absolutely smashed at? And I went through this whole time of what have I done? What am I in trouble about? What are they going to do? Shows you the kind of boy I was at school. Go to the headmaster's office is always about worry. And I got there, and we came in, sat down, and he had some coffee out, we had a coffee, and we chatted about a number of things. And then the headmaster looked over and he said, "Donna," he said, I just want to say that the school would love having you here, and we would like to create a permanent role here as chaplain in the school. He's offering me a job. I'd spent like a week worrying. What have I done wrong? Oh, I'm a naughty boy. What's he going to say to me? Oh no, please let not be safeguarding. It's interesting, isn't it? How many of us are like that? That things come up that we can do nothing about, and yet they take away our joy, our contentment, because we don't turn them into prayer. We give them to God. If you want to know how much God cares for us, look up 1 Peter 5 verse 7 afterwards. Just one of the places where it's explicitly said about how much we care. But let me give you just one final thought on this about contentment. When you read those verses, and when you read when it says, "But in everything," so do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, that's verse 6, "everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." I wonder in your mind, when were you thinking that might happen? 7 o'clock tomorrow morning for your quiet time? Maybe at the end of the day when you pray over things? But what about here and now? Because the more I thought about this and the more I read what some of the commentary had to say and stuff, I just think so often when we read these scriptures, we get into our individual mindset. But this is written to a church about something they're going to do together. That actually they're going to pray together about the concerns and the worries. And therefore they will be talking together and sharing together about the lack as well as what they do have. And I wonder whether that's God's way of saying, do you know what, when there are people who are really short amongst you, actually if as a church you're sharing together, another plug for prayer ministry, but actually it doesn't need to be limited to prayer ministry. If we're sharing together about what we have and our challenges and our struggles, then actually maybe some of those don't need to be prayed about. Because as a church, we can help meet those needs. And then that's why God has put us together as a church. It's really interesting, isn't it, just to think. So often we think that we have to manage everything on our own. And actually, it doesn't have to be like that. I remember when our kids were small, as you know, I love skiing, it's one of my passions. And when our kids were small, and I spent a lot of time teaching our own kids to ski. And I remarked to somebody once, they said, I feel as if I've spent the last about 5 years of my life only ever skiing in snowplow. If you don't know what a snowplow is, I'll explain afterwards. And I said, it's exhausting, it's really hard. And they said, but do you regret it? And I thought really, really hard. And I thought, actually no. God has done something in my heart that actually throwing myself off the top of the highest mountains and the steepest runs and doing the James Bond runs and all these other things that you can do in Switzerland and all these things, actually no, because I've learned actually the delight of doing something with others and not just for myself. That's the really, really important thing, isn't it? That actually, if we have a church here, it's so that we can delight and find contentment by being together, sharing one another's burdens, helping one another. And actually that maybe is why the Lord has given us some of the things he's given us, to be able to care for each other. And then finally in verse 8 he goes, finally, whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is anything of excellence, anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It's the key to contentment, isn't it? Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. 1 Peter 1:13, gird up your loins, written to an area where people had tunics and all kinds of different undergarments. Gird up the loins of your mind is the literal translation of 1 Peter 1:13. Fascinating. Think the right way about these things, and that will lead to contentment and gratitude. So we live in a world, don't we, where actually there are lots of things advertising works on developing that sense of longing and wanting more. How, as we as Christians, can we live in a world where sufficient leads to contentment and gratitude of heart?